Hello everyone, I'm Arthur McNeill from Webster University, Thailand. I work at the campus in Bangkok. It's a great pleasure to be invited to speak at the conference. This is the topic of my talk, what kind of English programs are needed to support the spread of English as a medium of education in Asia. Now, we're probably all aware of the impact of global English on our work, and I would like to focus on three aspects which appear to have influenced the way English language programs are approached and delivered. The changes which affect English for academic purposes, EAP, changes in EAL, English as an additional language, that is the term normally used in international schools for the English program offered to those students who don't speak English as a mother tongue. And then one of the biggest influences that's spreading globally, CLIL, the integration of content and English language programs. Now, just as an illustration, people like me who come from Europe have been very much aware of mainland Europe's embrace of English medium programs. This graph shows the growth in taught master's degrees offered through English in countries where English is not the local language. I'd also like at the beginning, when we're talking about growth and expansion, to look at some statistics from the international school developments. Here we can see that Asia, the focus of today's talk, 57.1% of international schools are actually located in Asia. So this region has seen enormous expansion. And if we look at the way the expansion has developed over the last 20 years, we can see quite extraordinary rates of growth. Schools going from 2,500 up to almost 12,000, number of students from about 1 million to about 6 million, teaching staff from 90,000 to 504. And of course, this is a very big business for the schools, since these are largely privately run. Now, I'll have a look about the Bangkok situation. Bangkok is one of the most attractive destinations for international schools. It has 118 international schools in one city. And almost half of the students attending the international schools are Thai. It means that their mother tongue is Thai. And it's probably interesting for us to ask what is the reason that so many families have chosen to send their children to international schools in their own country. It might be helpful if we just look at another recent development. You probably have seen the EF. As the map shows, some of the countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, are not performing terribly well. Orange and yellow refer to countries with low and very low English proficiency. And this includes countries like Thailand, Vietnam, and Myanmar. Now, there may be some connection between the expansion of international education in this part of the world and disappointing English results from the local state schools. And it is very likely that there's dissatisfaction, particularly with the way English is being taught. Now, it's not only a problem here. A number of scholars in our field have found that traditional language teaching in classrooms as a school subject produces poor results. results, and I'm going to refer to two scholars' views. We'll start with David Graddell. I expect you are familiar with his book, The Future of English, published in 1970, I think 75, and then the more recent book, English Next, which was about 10 years later, where Graddell, he was invited to write both of these works by the British Council, who were interested in the implications of global English. His comment on the way English has been taught is not encouraging. He's pointing out that in spite of the introduction of new technologies, in spite of the development of the so-called communicative approach to language teaching, it has only led to modest improvement by learners. Another scholar who has been critical is Mike Tullen from Birmingham University, and he is critical of some of the academic research in our field. And we will just go through his quotation line by line. So the reality is there's relatively sparse evidence of significant advances in learners' language proficiency that can be attributed to today's advanced linguistic insights and applications, compared with proficiency attainments from 20, 50, or even 200 years ago. Now, Tullen works in a department which is famous for developments such as corpus linguistics. The Cobold dictionary was a spin-out from his department. So my interpretation of this is that Tullen is referring to some of what appear to be the advancement in knowledge about language, the huge databases which are now informing dictionaries and some course books, do not seem to have made any obvious impact on the level of the learners. I'd like to look for a moment at the research in the field of second language acquisition and what it tells us about the factors which are associated with successful language learning. And there are three. This is something which most scholars appear to accept. We need input. That means that the learner needs to be exposed to the language being learned, probably through reading or listening, viewing. Output, that means the learner has to have the opportunity to produce the language in order to acquire it. And the third is that people need feedback. This obviously refers mostly to the feedback provided by teachers who actually make the learner aware of how their progress is. So it is these are certainly factors which we would expect to obtain within a language classroom. Now, I like to look at two approaches which appear to be very favourable towards language learning, and they both involve integration in some way. The first is CLIL, the Content and Language Integrated Learning, which started off in Europe in the 1990s and has now begun to dominate. Most people who learn a foreign language at a school in Western Europe learn it through CLIL, through the language being integrated into the learning of a content subject. It was largely influenced by pioneering work in Canada, particularly we're probably all familiar with the French and English immersion programs, which have produced rather impressive results. Some Southeast Asian countries have had EMI for some time, like countries in Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, but others have not had much English medium instruction. There has been an interesting growth in Thailand with what is called the EP program. EP stands for English Program, and these are schools which follow the national Thai curriculum but teach it through the medium of English, and they are producing excellent results. There are also interesting approaches to use the CLIL approach in vocational education. Let me just refer to one example. This is a project that I have been involved with. This is a teacher at a military technical training school. He is teaching students about air conditioning, and what struck as in this particular project, was that the subject teacher, who is enthusiastic about their subject, very interested in conveying the ideas, when they're able to do so in English, they seem to have a very, very positive impact upon the students, because the students likewise are interested in the subject. We can't always say that the student is interested in English as a subject which is not related to anything particular. So vocational CLIL would certainly fulfill some of the SLA conditions. We see in terms of the input, repeated encounters of target words and their combinations, which we know is essential for the long-term learning of vocabulary in a second language. They do it through relevant, authentic contexts, which tends to increase learner motivation. And the sort of things they use the language for, certainly what we saw in the technical training project, we see the functions such as describing, explaining, giving instructions, giving definitions, all of which are regarded as being very useful within academic contexts generally. Now, just a few words about how English for academic purposes has evolved over the recent years. We have seen a sort of shift from a narrow focus on language forms, from technical things like how to do citations and referencing, to a much broader approach to understanding what the student's entire academic experience is like. One advancement which is worthy of note is the knowledge base of the EAP teacher has been now described by organisations, in particular the BALIP, the British Association of Lecturers in English for Academic Purposes, produced a competency framework which tries to identify what it is that a teacher teaching university students academic English, what do they need to be aware of, what they need to know about. And the framework ended up informing this particular course. This is an online course in English for Academic Study, which is based on the BALIP principles. I was one of the authors of this course. It is intended for postgraduate students studying at English medium universities. Now the principles are these. We'll just go through them. If I start at the top and we go round one by one. Academic context, that the setting in which a student is learning the language is very important. So for example, if they're learning it to study the subject that they've admitted to a degree in, the type of assignments, the way that course is taught, the way that learning is measured needs to be reflected in the English preparation for the course. Disciplinary differences. We know that English, the type of English which is used across disciplines varies considerably. So if someone is going to be studying in engineering, they really do need to know how engineering uses English in its academic documentation. Discourse, the next one. Discourse, a knowledge of discourse and discourse analysis has been placed very high on the BALIP list of competencies, so that awareness of texts, how they're structured, what the salient features of them are. Student needs, seems obvious, but what the student is going to have to do outside the English course, the EAP teacher ought to be aware of that and be interested in trying to help the student to meet the needs. The next one is probably a rather general feature of most universities these days, that we're all trying to heighten students' critical awareness, critical thinking. So every teacher in the university is asked to do this, so that critical thinking should be part of EAP as well. Text processing and production. So we know that anyone studying in English medium is expected to read a lot of course materials, often authentic materials. They have to listen perhaps to explanations, to lectures, take part in seminars. And so the way that information is processed psychologically, so how do we listen and take notes, how do we read, how do we compose, needs to be reflected in the EAP teaching. And ideally, the EAP teacher should be able to develop courses and to develop them into syllabi so that they follow on, so that we see growth in students' command of academic English throughout their course. I visited an international school recently where my hosts were very proud to tell me that in their school every teacher is a language teacher. Now this is a very noble goal. I can remember some years ago when I was working at a university in Hong Kong, one of our vice provost teaching and learning made a statement to all the deans of the university and said every teacher is a language teacher, because it was an English medium university, and there was a lot of resistance, particularly on the part of big schools at law school, medical school, who resented having someone from an education background telling them how to deliver their courses. I think this resistance possibly has been reduced over the intervening period, and it's quite apparent that if we want to improve student proficiency results, there has to be a language awareness which stretches over the whole student experience. EAP, we can see, it has addressed it. EAL in international schools is addressing it right at the moment. Anyway, these are some of the changes which I think we can expect to see continuing, particularly for English medium education in Asia. And I would like to thank you very much for your presence and attention today. Bye.